This is Guillermo Campitelli, and I hope this explainer helps you understand the topics of the Minor Reality Masterclass. So in the first part, I'm going to provide a number of questions that I hope they encourage you to think about the topics that I went through in the masterclass more deeply and try to find the answers on your own. After you do that, come back to the video and see what I have to say and what the answers I provide to those questions. And in the third part, I'm going to go through applications to psychological research of the topics that we saw in the masterclass. Okay, so what resources should you use to go through this explainer? Okay, obviously the Masterclass, Minor Reality. An interesting resource, very useful, is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's in www.plato.stanford.edu, and you can search any of the topics that we go through in this explainer and the Masterclass, and you will certainly, or with high probability, find an answer. Another important tool is Google Scholar. In Google Scholar, you will find a lot of access to a lot of papers, and you can search for topics or for authors, and you can have access to some papers. Some papers you will not have access. If you go to the library, you can go to databases, and one very useful database is Scopus. You can search there again by topic or by author, and you will have there access to huge number of papers. Sometimes you need to go to the internet and find information there, or go and walk around, and you may find answers in the world. But most importantly, in this psychological course, I would like you to use your own mind to try to find answers to these questions. So I'm going to give you answers, but I'd like you to exercise your thinking, your independent research of things, and try to find the answers yourself. Now, I warn you, some of the answers to these questions are not straightforward. There are many different answers to the questions I provide. So I'm going to give you what's the answers that different people, different authors have provided, or the main answer that is currently accepted in psychological research. Okay, let's start with the guiding question. So remember, after you see the question, try to answer that on your own, or with a friend, or with another student, or a group of students. Okay, question number 1. What does the term reality refer to? Question number 2. What is reality like? Question 3. Is reality independent of the mind? Question 4. What does the term mind refer to? Question 5. What is the mind like? Question 6. Is mind independent from reality? Okay, so these are the questions. Pause the video and come back. These are the answers. Okay, question 1. What does the term reality refer to? So you can search in Google for a definition, a dictionary definition. And actually, that's actually quite good. So the definition I found in Google is the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. So it's the question, this first question and the fourth question are very, very tricky, because the answer to this question, I'm asking an answer independent from what different theories say about this. But it's very difficult to do that. typically the answers are theory-laden, so they depend on what I've already believe about that. So it's not an easy question. So question 1 and question 4 are quite difficult to answer. But I wanted to try to give you an idea of what we are talking about when we say reality, and separate that from what different people believe what reality is. Okay? So this definition is reasonably good, the state of things as they actually exist. So it's the world out there as it exists, not my ideas of the world out there. Okay? So that's reality, the things that exist. Okay, question 2. What is reality like? And here we've got plenty of ideas of what reality is like, and we went through those ideas in the masterclass. So when we talk about atoms, and then we talk about Aristotle's idea of reality, so we have these different views. So for Democritus, reality is made of atoms and empty space. But for Aristotle, that's not enough. So for Aristotle, form is more important than the matter. So the formal cause and the material cause. So for Aristotle, what makes something what it is its form, not its material aspect. Then we talked about empty space, and that was the idea of Democritus, atoms in empty space. And the idea of empty space was also taken by Newton. But Newton went against what the mechanistic philosophers believed about the world. The world is like a clock, and a clock with all these gears that one touches the other. So empty space, it wasn't something accepted for the mechanistic philosophers. So that was a problem in Newton's theory that was solved by, I talked about Einstein, but before Einstein we had Maxwell and Faraday that talked about fields. And so instead of having empty space is not empty, is fields. So fields through which electricity and magnetism occurs, and in Einstein even gravity. So there is a gravitational field, which is actually how space is constituted. Space is not empty, it is curved, and things attract each other because of this curvature of the universe. Okay, another thing that we talked about was whether the reality is deterministic. Is the world deterministic? Are things, if I know, like Laplace's demon, if I know the position of the objects of every particle in the world, can I predict with certainty what will happen a second later, 2 seconds later, years later? If everything is deterministic, then for Laplace, then such a demon or supreme intellect can actually determine with precision what will happen next. But is the world like this? That's an open question, and now it's a debate. When we talked about quantum mechanics, we saw Niels Bohr in the masterclass. when you go, quantum mechanics is about very small particles. And when you try to predict the behavior of very small particles, you cannot use the laws of physics that apply for macroscopic objects. And you can only use what's called a wave function to predict with certain probability. So now, but Einstein believes that the universe is still deterministic. What we don't know is very well how it works. So we cannot determine with precision what would happen because our lack of knowledge. But the universe is deterministic. But other views would say no, there is what happens in the microscopic level, in the quantum level, is chance. There is no determination over there. So we've got these two views about things. And then we saw the work of Nancy Cartwright, and she says in her two books how the laws of physics lie and the double world is, well, yes, there are some laws that allow us to understand how the world works, but they are not universal. They are always constrained. They depend on conditions on a specific part of the universe or at a specific time. So the world is more patched than it's believed. We cannot find universal laws. The laws have to be perhaps deterministic, but at specific places. The other discussion is whether the reality is mathematical. And that was certainly what Pythagoras and Plato believed, and a lot of theoretical physicists today. And that's something I'm completely against. To me, mathematics is a very important tool that we are going to use in this course a lot to try to understand the universe, not only predict. So it's not just instrumentalist that mathematics is used to predict, but it helps us also understand mechanisms in the world. But the world is not mathematical. It's not an abstraction. The world is physical. It's not a mathematical abstraction. So Sabine Hossenfelder, in her book Lost with Maths, explains this very well. Mathematics is a tool, very useful tool, but the universe is not mathematical. Is the reality mechanical? Well, this is similar to deterministic, and that was a very important idea that started with Democritus and Copernicus, Newton, Galileo Galilei, Kepler. So these, and Descartes as well. So conceiving the universe as a machine was a tremendous progress over the full of purpose universe of Aristotle. So by getting rid of the idea of purpose everywhere, the scientists were able to understand how the universe works much better than assigning purpose to things. So, but is it really mechanical? Well, with fields, theories about fields in the universe, we believe it's less mechanical, but it's mechanical in some respects. But that idea is now out of date. In terms of things that are respect to the mind, the idea that the mind is mechanical, that's not the case anymore, so researchers don't believe that anymore. They believe that the mind is more dynamic and active. Okay, so another thing is that science describes reality, or is an instrument to predict. Well, that's the discussion between Einstein and Niels Bohr. For Einstein, science describes reality, or it's an attempt to describe reality. So all the theories that we have about reality are about things that occur. But Bohr says, no, science is not about that. Science is about prediction. So the mathematical formulas allow us to predict things. Now, my view in this is in between these two. So I believe that science is about describing reality as is. But because our mind is limited, so what the theories that we produce about reality are limited. So so our theories are attempts to explain reality, and you should make that attempt to explain reality. We shouldn't shy away from that purpose. But because of our limitation, we have to be humble. We have to say that's our limited understanding of reality. Now, having said that, when we have this realistic, so this is scientific realism, we have this scientific realistic stance about what science is, we sometimes forget about the limitations, and we start to talk about the concepts in the theories as things that are there. And sometimes we can't do that, because sometimes our mathematical equations, some components of the mathematical equations, they are there because of convenience, not because they are capturing something that is happening in reality. So this is a very important aspect that we need to we should not forget. So in that respect, I am with Niels Bohr. Sometimes we can only, because of our limitations, we can only try to predict what happens without trying to understand how reality is. So we have to make the attempt, but we should be humble. And universal laws of double work. So basically I just went through these, the idea of Nancy Cartwright, that the laws of physics are not universal, and we shouldn't attempt to find universal laws, because what she says is that the laws work very well within the model that we have about reality. But the model that we have about reality is not how reality is. It's just a model. So when we go out there and touch and experience reality is more patched. It's doubled. It's not uniform. We cannot find universal laws that apply to everything. Question 3. Is reality independent of mind? The idea of this question is whether, if we perceive reality with our minds, then is it possible to actually have access to the reality as it is? or it depends on our mind. Okay, so currently the main view is that there is reality independent of the mind, but our knowledge of it is limited. And this corresponds to, more or less, to Immanuel Kant's view about the mind as an active structure in the brain that contains what he calls categories, but today in cognitive psychology we call schemas, or even scripts, or knowledge structures that our mind possesses, and we perceive the world filtered by these structures in our mind. So our mind is not just a tabula rasa, an empty slate that copies what is out there. We give structure to the world. So for Kant, we can never know the reality as is. He calls that the noumena. We cannot know reality as is. We can only have access to the phenomena, which is what we perceive about reality. And our perception is a construction based on our categories, our schemas in our minds. Now, so this seems to be quite pessimistic about the capacity to know about reality, but it is intermediate between two views. One view is the idealism, the German idealism that came after Kant, and they actually was based on Kant's ideas, which is that everything is mind. There is no reality out there. There is just mind. Everything, all our perceptions and sensations, that's all what it is. There is nothing else. So that's idealism. So that mind is what, not something that allows us to perceive reality. Mind is everything. And the opposite view is the naive realism, which is that reality is exactly as we perceive it. So our mind is transparent, it gives us a window to the reality, and we perceive everything as is. So both views are too extreme. So Kant's view is actually intermediate. And that's what it is. It's not pessimistic. It's to me, in my view, that's realistic. It is what it is. We have limited access. Imagine, we are colors that we can't see, sounds that we can't hear. So just these simple things. So there are a lot of things out there that our knowledge of that is limited. So, but that doesn't mean that we cannot know something about reality because of our limitations. We can know. It's like when a blind person has limitations to understand reality, but that doesn't mean that a blind person cannot understand reality at all. And perhaps even by those limitations can understand more things than other people without those limitations. So that's my answer to this question. Is reality independent of the mind? Well, yes, there is a reality out there which is independent of the mind, but our knowledge of it is limited. So we have to be humble about what we say about reality. What does the concept mind refer to? And my answer here would be a first approximation, because we are going to go through the concept of mind throughout the first part of this course. Okay, so Aristotle, or half of Aristotle, the half that I really like about Aristotle is that mind is the form of the organism that allows the organism to think, feel, and decide. If that were the whole definition of mind that Aristotle provided, which was actually similar to the idea of souls, Aristotle proposed the vegetative soul, the sensitive soul, and the rational soul. So for the nutritive, vegetative, and the sensitive souls, the idea of soul that he had is what I believe about the mind as well, which is it is the structure, and I would add the dynamics of the organism that allows the organism to behave the way it behaves. So the vegetative soul allows the organism to grow in a specific way because of a structure. So the soul will be the structure of the organism. And so the mechanisms inside the organism that allows the organism to grow and obtain nutrition. The sensitive soul, same thing, but respect to observing things and moving in the world. And the rational soul, I would say to Aristotle, is the same. So the way thinking, feeling, deciding is the same as the other souls. The mind would be the organization of the organism that allows us to do that. Okay? But then Aristotle was ambiguous, and he added that the rational soul or the mind has parts of it are the structure of the organism, the form of the organism, but other parts are immaterial or immortal. So that's the part that I would disagree. Okay, for Descartes, the concept of mind is close to what today we call consciousness and volition. So he had the idea of the mind being something that has a unity. So that's why he was against the idea of brain being the mind. Brain was where the mind and the body connect, but cannot be the mind because we've got a subjective experience of being a self, which is one, and that you cannot find in the brain, which has clearly separated parts. So now, although the dualistic theory of Descartes, the idea of that an immaterial mind separated from the material body, it's not popular anymore, but I think we current philosophers, psychologists, and neuroscientists forget about the aspect of the subjective experience that for Descartes was very important and was the essence of what the mind is. So, yes, Descartes is not what I believe is correct, Descartes' view about the mind, but I agree with Descartes that it is important to take into account the subjective experience. Now, the reductionistic materialism or eliminative materialism of Patricia Churchland and others believes that when we talk about mind, we talk about the brain. It's exactly there is no difference. And basically, they propose let's stop using concepts like emotions, memory, working memory. Let's talk about the brain, about the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the neurotransmitters that go from one synapse to another, to one neuron to another through the synaptic connection. So that's a view that I disagree with. And then one very popular in these days that I didn't discuss in the masterclass, but we are going to go through this during the course, is functionalism, which is considering the mind as a computer. And so basically a computer produces computations, and that allows us to solve problems, make decisions, remember things, and pay attention to things, etc. The idea of functionalism is that the mind is that, and it doesn't matter what material organism or system produces that. It could be a human brain, or it could be a computer, and perhaps something else. So for functionalism, the mind is the function, is not the substrate, it's not the material substrate of an organism. Okay, so question 5. What is the mind like? And again, first approximation, this will be very quick and dirty, because we are going to go through these, because that's what psychology is about. And not only in this course, but in other courses, you will see what is the structure of the mind. Okay, so as I said before, for Descartes, the mind is unified and rational. For materialism, the mind is mechanical, and the current main view is that mind is computational. And that's all I'm going to say at this stage. There will be a lot more coming in other masterclasses. Question 6. Is the mind independent from reality? Okay, so this is the other way around. So in question 3, I asked, is reality independent of mind? And here I'm asking whether the mind is dependent from reality. And the answer that Descartes would give is yes. That's the mind-body dualism. The mind is not in reality. It's not part of the universe. It's not part of the material universe. It interacts with it, but it's not part of the universe. And this view was discredited because he could never explain, and nobody else could, how something that is not part of the universe, of the material universe, can interact with the universe. Okay. And for materialism, for Kant, and for the modern view, is the mind independent from reality? No. Minds are part of the universe. Okay, so these are the questions, the answers, and the third part of this explainer is about applications to psychological research. So I'm going to explain why we are talking about mind and reality in a course of psychological methods. And first of all, because we need to, when we study, when we think about methods to do research in psychology, we need to understand what's the subject matter of psychology. And I'm going to answer with 3 words here. One subject matter is mind, another one is consciousness, and another one is behavior. And giving this answer is a bit tricky because for different schools of psychology, the answer was different. And what they mean about these different concepts is different for different schools. So I'm going to very quickly give an idea of what I mean by this. So when I say that we are investigating the mind, I'm talking about the structure of an organism that allows the organism to think, feel, have emotions, make decisions, perceive the world, memorize, pay attention, etc. Now, consciousness is part of that to me, but the main psychological views at the moment, they treat the mind as different from consciousness, and that's why consciousness, and you're going to see this during the course, was ignored for a while in psychology, and now it returned in the 1990s, returned as part of as being the subject matter of psychological research again. And behavior is what organisms do, and there is a behavioristic school of psychology that decided to study not the mind, not consciousness, just behavior. Now, today we investigate behavior to try to understand the mind. We investigate behavior to understand behavior. So these are the two ways in which we use the study of behavior in current research. And then I have more questions. And this, I'm not going to give an answer like in the previous ones. These are things that I want you to take home and think about, and perhaps we can give an answer to these in later masterclasses. But this is a debate that I want to open, and it's a current debate between psychologists. So, what are the terms that we use, refer to? So, for example, intelligence. Is intelligence real? So, and this is why I wanted to talk about reality. Are the things, the concepts that we use in psychology, refer to something out there in the world? So is intelligence a part of the brain? Or is intelligence a useful concept to understand the behavior of people? And there will be different views about these among psychologists and neuroscientists. I'm going to give you more questions, but again, the idea is to open the debate, not to give an answer today. Is depression real? Again, is depression something that is happening to an individual, or is a concept that helps us understand? So, intelligence and depression and other mental health concepts are similar in the sense that depression could be considered a combination of a lot of symptoms, or something that is causing those symptoms. So that's why I'm asking, is depression real, or is depression a concept that is useful to understand why people have a collection of symptoms? Or in terms of intelligence, is intelligence that causes the performance in different tests, or intelligence is just a summary of the performance in different tests? So that's why I wanted to put the issue of reality as the first masterclass, because there are issues of psychological concepts that we need to know what we are referring to, and in some cases they are talking about something out there, in some cases it's just a useful concept to understand what's going on. 9. If the mind is material, can psychology only study the brain? My answer to that is no. I believe the mind is material. It's not separated from the body. But that doesn't mean that we can only study the mind by studying the brain. We can study the behavior of the organism to understand the mind. And also we can use mental terms like memory or working memory, long-term memory, different types of memory, or different other structures like knowledge structures, schemas, etc., without talking about brain structures or brain processes. Is that because mental processes do not occur in the brain? No, they do occur in the brain, but it's a different way of describing what's going on. And this is very normal. We do that all the time. So, for example, we can describe a school in terms of the buildings it has. Here is there are 3 classrooms. There are 5 classrooms. Here is the oval, etc., etc., etc. Or we can describe the school, the same school, in terms of students, teachers, administrative staff, etc. So we're talking about the same thing. It's a school, but we concentrate in different aspects. So in one case we talk about more the architectonical structure of the school. In another way we talk about the type of people who come to the school. So when you talk about memory and attention, perception, etc., or different structures of the mind, we are talking about the brain and the rest of the body, not just the brain. But we talk about different things using a different classification because we pay attention to different things. It's not that things occur in some other place. Question 10. Is behavior important for psychology? Extremely important. We can only know about the structure of the mind by observing behavior. That's the only thing we can do. And behavior is what people do. It could be to answer questions in a questionnaire, to press buttons when solving a task in the computer screen, or it could be to report something they are thinking, or they report about their emotions, etc. Behavior is what we observe when we do research in psychology. And the last question: what is the role of the rest of the body, not the brain, in the mind? And this is something personal. I am against the idea, this brain-centric idea of the mind, that the brain is where everything happens in the mind, and the body is like an extension. So basically, the body is the input, where we get the input from the environment, and our muscles provide the output. So there are new ideas about what is called embodied cognition or enacted cognition. That is that the whole body participates in mental processes.